am going to start recording. The next thing I want to share before we get started, as usual, is the parking lot. So I'm going to click on this link, which will load the Jamboard for today's training. And I'll share the link with all of you in the chat. So there's the link for today's training. This first slide is just instructions for how to use the Jamboard. You don't need to type or add anything here. What you'll want to do is come up to the next frame, this arrow on the right top, and then you'll find the parking lot. And this parking lot space is just if you have any questions that come up during the training, things that you want to ask, but maybe we don't have time for, go ahead and post them here at any point throughout today, and I'll make sure to follow up and answer those questions either in my post-training memo or before we end our session today. So now jumping back over to the slides, I want to introduce today's training by saying that today's training breaks the fourth wall, which is to say that I'm letting you peek behind the curtain at my process that I use when I'm training. And my process is informed by my experience of teaching in public schools for 10 years in public and private schools, mostly public schools, and also from my graduate school experience of getting a master's in education. And so I've tried to share my experience, including an insight into how I prepared this presentation and training that you are all participating in right now, so that you can see what I was doing as I put this experience, this training experience together for all of you. So when you see a big piece of red or any of this red color, that tells you that I am talking about something that was behind the scenes in my own process. So this training is meta, which means that the training and the slides themselves, they're being used to show you, to model, to demonstrate the best practices for training facilitation. So some things just to pay attention to. Please look at what happened behind the scenes. Think about what I might have been doing in my own preparation, putting together this training. Pay attention to the slide design, how much text is on slides, the balance between text and images. Pay attention to the narrative arc or the story that I'm trying to tell you. I think trainings are a lot more effective when they have a sort of story throughout the training. Pay attention to my demeanor, right? Am I gruff? Am I smiling? Am I welcoming folks? It's a part of the presentation and facilitation skill set. And then also just consider anything else, right? Anything else behind the scenes that I might have done to prepare, that I might be doing during the training to keep myself going. I'll share that I have an agenda printed next to me so that I can keep track of time for myself. That's one example of something I do. So just really pay attention and try to look behind the scenes, see through the surface of what is on the screen. And I've put these red boxes throughout the training so you can see when I'm showing you a piece of the meta or what I did behind the scenes for this training. So for today, welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Our main objective for today is to hone your meeting and presentation facilitation skills. So that will focus and take a look at pre-planning and planning any training or meeting that you have, your actual facilitation skills, speaking and presenting information during the training, some quick tools and tips that might help save you some time, reduce your anxiety, and help you to prepare more effectively. And then also some planning practice. So as a part of this last piece, the planning practice, I did share with all of you in an email today's participant guides, and I will put these links in the chat for you in case you didn't get to look at them yet. So here is the participant guide. It is in both English and Spanish. If you already have a copy of it from my email yesterday, excuse me, or you were able to print it already, then you probably don't need to open up the link that I just put into the chat. The link that I just put into the chat is Microsoft Word, in case that works for you. And then I do have another version of this same document. And since I know that not everyone has Microsoft Word, I'm going to put another link in the chat right now. And this is for a PDF of the exact same participant guide that you all will need to run the training today and participate today. So I do want to spend just a moment on this participant guide so you know what you're looking at. The first page is just the agenda for today's session. So it just shows you what we will cover today. And then if you scroll down, beginning on the second page is the English version of your participant guide. You don't have to do anything on this right now. I'll go over it when we get to it later in today's training in just like 15, 20 minutes. But I want you to know where it is so that when I say participant guide, this is what I am talking about. If you keep scrolling down on the participant guide, there is a Spanish version that is also included in the same file. And that Spanish version starts on page 5. So you'll see when it switches to Spanish. And thank you so much to Scotty from my team for his hard work in helping me translate this document. I really appreciate it, providing access to everyone. So now we'll jump back to our slides, which looks like they started over. So let's get caught up. So back to our introduction and objective. Lots of things to cover today, from planning to facilitation, and then just a little bit of the meta, or looking behind the scenes. In any training you develop at the very beginning, the way I have done just now, it's a really good idea to help orient your audience to what they will be talking about. So you should look at your agenda and objective and introduce those to your audience really early in your training so folks know what we will talk about and why they are here. So that's what I've just done. I went over our objectives for today, shared with you why we're here. I also showed you the tools that you will need to use to participate today, the participant guide, so that you're ready to go. You know what's coming up, and you can begin anticipating some of it in your own head. Connected to this idea of introducing objectives early to orient your audience is the idea of framing. And framing is a way to limit the scope of your training so that you don't end up taking on too much. So within framing, you begin to tell a story to your audience about why they are here with you today, what they will gain from today's training, why it might be helpful for their work. And so what you want to do with framing is you want to connect the upcoming content of your training, in this case, how to do a training, with your audience members' prior knowledge. What do your audience members already know about your training topic? So in this case, what I'm trying to do with my framing is start to plant some seeds and get you to think about, gosh, what do I already know about training, meetings, planning, facilitation? And if you can introduce that story effectively in the beginning of your training, if you can provide that framing, it helps set the stage and prepare your audience to ramp up into more difficult content or concepts. So for today's training that you are all participating in, this training, here's the framing for today. Today, we're going to review the most important fundamental pieces of information and skill that are required to orchestrate a training from inception to delivery. And there's a lot that goes in that. So we are going to speed through some things, but this should give you a good overview of the steps you need to take to successfully plan and deliver any training for any training need that you or your organization may have. And approaching this idea of preparing trainings is a little bit counterintuitive, because the best practice when you're designing any learning experience is to do this process that's called backwards planning or backwards design. And I use both terms. So if you hear me say backwards planning or backwards design, I'm talking about the same thing. And that's counterintuitive because what it means is that you want to start any training planning process from the end of your training and then work backwards from there. So what does that look like? It means that at the very beginning of your training, the question that you want to be asking yourself is, if I did a good job at the end of my training, what will my guests know and be able to do that they didn't know before? And what do I need to do during my training to guide folks to that destination? So it's a little counterintuitive because the best thing to do when you're planning a training is to start at the end. What is the actual objective and goal of this training? What do I want my audience members to know and to be able to do by the end? And what do I need to do during my training to get them there? So for this training, in my backwards planning process, I started at the end with the objective of folks need to offer a training on any topic 1 month from today. If I do a good job today, you should feel confident in planning and setting up a training for yourselves 1 month from now. And that was really the goal for this training. And that's where all of my planning came from, that goal. So looking a little closer at backwards planning or backwards design, I just wanted to mention that this is a process that a lot of us actually already do in a lot of different places in our lives. We actually already know that backwards planning works. It's a part of why Google Maps asks for your destination first and not your starting point. It needs to know how to route you to where you're trying to go. It doesn't need to know where you're starting from until after that, because it can't give you the best directions unless it knows where you want to end. And trainings are the same way. You want to look at the end goal and then work backwards from there. Similarly, we can see this in movies. The Marvel movie series was actually pretty good. It got good reviews. It made a lot of money. People were talking about it, going to see it. It was a pop culture phenomenon. On the other hand, the DC movie series, different comics with Batman and Superman, have been recognized as pretty bad overall. Some people like them, but not as popular. And I think the reason for this is because the Marvel movies started at the end. The Marvel movies knew they were going to some big
Talk about that
final...
later. Okay. And Kelly calls, if you could.
Sorry. So the Marvel movies, I think, started at the end. They had this vision for a big finale that pulled lots of different stories together. The DC movies didn't do that. And because of that, they just released this recent The Flash movie. And the whole goal of that movie was to reboot the entire thing and start over. And so hopefully, with respect to Batman and Superman and our other DC comic superheroes, hopefully they'll do a better job this time. But I will say that when I put this together, that Flash movie wasn't out yet and it hasn't gotten very good reviews. So this topic around DC has aged like milk. They're not doing backwards planning, it doesn't seem like. So poor Batman. Hopefully Batman will get another good movie sometime soon. So to pull it together, starting at the end makes sense. It's intuitive and counterintuitive at the same time. So another piece of the meta is that once you've gone through your objective and your framing, your audience knows why they're here and what they'll gain from the training session, you want to really early ask folks to engage. You want to give them the opportunity to speak or to share or to reflect independently. There are a lot of different ways to have early engagement in your training, but you usually want to have some sort of engagement piece within the first 15, 20 minutes of getting started. It could be an icebreaker, a game, a reflection question, a Jamboard, which is what we are about to do. There are lots of options for your early engagement, but you do want to do some engagement piece pretty early. And you also don't want your early engagement piece to take too long, because you probably have a lot to get through. And if you have an early engagement piece that really stretches out, it might mess up your whole agenda that's supposed to happen after that engagement piece. So for today's engagement piece for our group, right, kind of bouncing back and forth between the behind the scenes look and actually participating today, I want to offer you all an early engagement piece. And that early engagement piece for today is simply around this question on the screen. Think about one of the best classes, trainings, presentations, or meetings that you've ever been in. You could also include conferences or other places where people gather to learn. I want you to think about those learning experiences and ask yourself, what made that experience so great? What makes a good training for you? What are some of the things you observe when you're in a training and you're like, this is great, this is helpful, I want to get more of these trainings like this? So in order to share your answers for that, we'll come back to the Jamboard. And on the third page of the Jamboard is the same question that I just asked you to answer. I'm going to put the link for the Jamboard back in the chat one more time so it's easy to access. And you can either add your answers to this Jamboard, you can type them in the chat, you can raise your hand in the call and share, just unmute and share if you would like. This is just kind of an open space to share your thoughts on what makes a good training in whatever way works for you. So are there any thoughts or experiences that people want to share about what makes a good training? Couple of things popping on the Jamboard. Information is organized. Trainers that don't just read. Fun engagement activities. Being relatable. When the instructor is passionate and well-informed. When the staff is very prepared with visuals as well as paper and audio, covering all learning aspects. Engagement popping up again, games and fun popping up a few times. Having valuable content. Facilitator has a pulse. Yes, I have been in those trainings where the facilitator sits and reads a page at you in a very monotone voice the whole time. And it's painful. Each minute feels like an hour in those training spaces. Preparation, program management, feeling like you're listened to. So go ahead and keep adding as you have new ideas about what makes for a good training. The Jamboard is open for the whole training, so you can just keep popping in there whenever you would like. But this is a really good list, and I think it matches several of our objectives for today. I already shared that our objectives for today include things like participation, audience engagement, preparation and planning as really important, focusing on framing your content, limiting it so that it's not too much. In person, I know I love in-person training, and it is such a struggle. When we have folks all over the state, it's my dream to have everyone be able to come to in-person trainings. We just live in such a large state that gathering everyone is really tough, and transportation issues and all of that. So I know I am with you on that in-person one. I wish we could do that more or at all. Great, thanks so much, folks. I'm going to switch us back to the slides. A couple of other things were also typed in the chat, so take a look there. And now on for the meta. What I was trying to do here, I was trying to tap into what you already know about trainings based on your prior experience with trainings. And I'm also trying to associate trainings with a positive memory. I'm trying to make trainings feel less scary. I'm trying to make them feel like something that's good. Because if you're learning how to do it, you don't want it to be scary. That prevents people from learning. So moving forward, I started today with framing around backwards planning, and we are really going to continue from this idea of starting at the end. What is your goal? And planning your training backwards from there. And this really ties into the importance of planning in general. The biggest part of preparing for any training is the planning. If you've done a good job with the planning, the actual training part, like what we are all doing right now here together, it might feel anxious, it might feel nervous, but it shouldn't feel hard because you should have everything you need prepared and ready to go. So for this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about how backwards planning results in smooth meetings and presentations, and why that planning process is so, so important. And to start, just want to share some of the benefits of thorough planning. If you do a really good job of planning, your anxiety about trainings will be lower because you'll have a sense of what it is you want and need to do. Proper planning also demonstrates respect for your audience. If there aren't things like typos or visual glitches, if things run really smoothly, your audience notices. If things get kind of thrown off, it can prevent people from learning. And so planning is what shows that respect for your audience's time. Planning also allows you to troubleshoot issues before they become a bigger issue. So with proper planning, you'll know ahead of time if you have a projector or not in your conference space. You'll know whether or not you need a special cord or adapter to hook up to that projector. You'll know if you have a microphone or not. Just trying to show that planning allows you to foresee problems that might arise and prevent those problems. Are there any other benefits of thorough planning that folks can think of, either for training or for outreach or for anything else? Why is planning important? And you can just feel free to unmute, raise your hand, or share in the chat. Yes, thank you, Melanie Jo, in the chat. Space issues, right? How many guests will you have? Do you have a space that holds that many guests? If not, you need a lot of extra time to find one. Maybe pay a registration fee. Certainly enough time to book it and make sure the space is available. Yeah, so space is a big one, especially for in-person meetings. What are some other benefits of planning? Language interpretation, absolutely. I emailed Naomi, who's interpreting for us today, about this a week and a half ago, I think, maybe a week ago. But I do try to give at least a week, 2 weeks. And that takes time.
John,
Yes.
planning is just like a road. You know where you're going, when you're gonna turn, where you're gonna stop, where are the red lights, everything. It gives you a really vision. It's a vision, is what I say, and it helps you to also have times to be more flexible. So it gives you a whole idea of what's going on or will going on, even expecting some issues, technical difficulties. So in at the moment that anything presents, you know how to address that. It's not like, oh, I don't know what to do now because it was not in my mind and my plan.
Absolutely. I love that metaphor that it's like a road. You know where you need to turn. You know that if your road that you want to take is closed, that you have a detour that you can take. Right? So I love that metaphor. Silda, go ahead. Silda, would you like to share?
Y yo pienso que también lo que es importante, ¿verdad? Para planificar bien y todo.
For planning and everything, I think it's important to practice. Like if we practice with the questions that we're supposed to do with our community or practice with our programs, with the presentation. So I think practice is really important.
Absolutely. Practice is super important. When I do bigger trainings, like the orientation that CHWI held for our partners a while back, I always do a dress rehearsal with my team where we go through the whole training as fast as we can just to see what issues might come up. There's several other contributions in the chat, so I encourage you to look there. But just a look behind the curtain at what I did in this planning for this training is that I'm just furthering the story. I'm continuing with my framing about planning and backwards planning, and now I'm starting to push it forward and say, here's why we start with planning. Here's why backwards planning is so important. So another thing I'm trying to do here is cultivate your buy-in. I'm trying to make you see and understand and believe why planning is so important. So a really good way to do that is to ask for your thoughts, to ask you to share the way that I just did. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just wanted to show this mostly as a visual. This is a planning flow chart. Whoops. Sorry, folks, if I hear that unmute happen, which just, it happens accidentally, it's okay. I am just going to mute you. So if you do want to share, please raise your hand just so I know that that's what it's for. Otherwise, I'll remute just so we can keep going. Sorry about that, whoever I just muted. So again, looking at the planning flow chart, which many of you I think have seen, the main thing to notice is the two sections on the left, this pre-planning and planning, are very busy. there's a lot of different things underneath pre-planning and planning. And then once you get to the actual delivery of the training, there's really not that much going on. And so I will share this with you because it does take you through the steps that I think people should take when they're planning a training. And you can print this and use it to help you plan your own trainings. But for now, I just wanted to show the visual of how heavy the left side of this image is and how light the right side is. I also want to mention that this is a bunch of information that if I tried to put it on slides using bullet points and pictures, it would probably take up 15 or 20 slides. And that's too many. And so I made this flowchart to condense it all down, to make it easier to see. So a part of training is thinking of creative ways to present your information. So backwards planning. We're going to practice the first step of backwards planning right now, which is to think about an upcoming training need that you have for yourself or your organization, and begin to set the main goal that you have for your guests in that training. What do you want them to know and to be able to do by the end of that training? So for this, we are going to go back, we are going to go back to the participant guide. And let me just put those links back for you real quick to make it a little easier. So there's the participant guide. And on the participant guide, in English, you'll want to go to page 2. In Spanish, you will want to go to page 5. And we're going to begin doing some work on the participant guide, starting with backwards planning and objectives. So I want you to think about this question. What is an upcoming training need that you have for people that you work with, for a training that you want to plan and prepare and provide for others? Is it around issues related to substance use? Is it around mental health issues? Is it around how to do outreach? It really doesn't matter, just any training need that you might have, put that in your head. And then I want you to do a brainstorm where you just list everything you know about that training, the topic, how much you know about that topic, the audience, who would you like to have come to this training? When do you need to do this training? Is it urgent or can it wait a little while? How long will the training be? And other information like that. Just brainstorm everything that you can about an upcoming training need that you have. If you have the participant guide printed, feel free to actually just write all over it. If not, you can pull out a separate piece of paper to do this and kind of follow along with the participant guide on your screen. It doesn't matter how you do this, but just spend a minute or two brainstorming ideas about an upcoming training need. And those instructions are also on the slide on the left side. And I'm just giving a couple of quiet minutes for folks to do their brainstorm. Take just one more minute for your brainstorm. I know that's fast, but you can always revisit it later too. And as you're doing your brainstorm, maybe slowing down a little bit at this point, start looking at the next question on your participant guide and the box below that. And it says, based on your training brainstorm above, write 1 or 2 sentences only that answer the following questions. What is your objective for the upcoming training? In other words, what do you want your audience, your guests at your training, what do you want them to know or be able to do after the training ends? And this is kind of tough. I'm asking you to condense a lot of information from your brainstorm into 1 or 2 sentences only. What is your main goal? And if you are working on this in Spanish, just a reminder that these questions we're on right now are on page 5. I just had a question in chat that makes me want to check to see, are folks able to see my screen okay right now? Are you seeing the participant guide? Okay, great, thank you. So if you just wrote to me in chat about that, it might be on your end. You may need to leave and rejoin the call. So to share an example, in case it's helpful, for today's training that you are all in, when I was doing this process for myself, the objective, the goal that I wrote for myself was, by the end of my training, this training we are in today, I want all of you to be able to plan a training around any topic, assuming that that training was about 1 month from now. And you'll remember that I actually shared that as my objective with you all. So as you're working on this, I wonder if there's anyone who has already come up with an objective, 1 or 2 sentences for what you want folks to get out of your training. And if you have gotten there, I'd love to hear some examples.
I can go.
Go
Chan.
ahead.
Yes, is discover how recognizing our talents and skill help us to do a better use of them in our personal and professional lives.
I love it. Yeah, looking at some pieces of self-awareness, it sounds like. How do our own skills and knowledge allow us to operate in our work lives, in our personal lives. Great example and a good objective. So that might, for me, this is just where my brain goes, that might lead into like a self-awareness and skill building training. Silda, go ahead. Oh, whoops, I think I got Silda when she was talking. Fred, I saw your hand. Do you want to go and then I'll come back to Silda when she's done?
I could jump in real quick. This is in context to maybe when I'm thinking about training is engaging the actual public and having some sort of public engagement / discord. And for me, based on why we're all here is the role of a CHW and having more public awareness of what that role is. Creating confidence and understanding and actually opening up the platform and space for people to be engaged, of understanding what the role of CHW is, how is it in reference to their community, and also empowering them to kind of celebrating that they are also CHWs. So kind of promoting within and creating those agents of change through awareness. That's kind of what I came to.
Absolutely love it. And it's an important part of our charge and our work to promote the CHW profession, to spread awareness of the CHW profession. And so I think those are some great objectives to really focus on the strong work CHWs are doing, to share that with the public. And there are a lot of ways that you could do that. Based on the objective that you just explained for us here, I was thinking, well, you could, from that objective, plan some focus groups or listening sessions. You could plan a training that's more traditional, like the ones I typically run. You could plan dialogue sessions or affinity spaces. There are a lot of different directions you can go from your objective. So thank you for sharing that example, because it shows that regardless of what your training looks like, this backwards planning process stays the same. It gets you where you want to go, just like the road that Fabiola shared or the Google Maps example that I shared at the start, right? Are there any other examples of objectives for a training that folks would like to share?
I just adjusted mine to be more specific. So, and it said, discover how our talents and skill facilitates our productivity in our professional personal lives. So it's more like a.
Yeah, that's perfect, right? Because that is the next step in the process, is to refine, to revise your objective, because that's how you get to your framing, limiting the scope of what you're talking about. Go ahead, Melanie Jo. I think you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I wrote on my objective, being able to relay the topic to an audience and have them retain the information and use the information in confidence.
Absolutely. It's a good objective. That would be an objective that was really similar to the one that I wrote for this training, about giving information, having folks who are participating feel confident in their own training ability. And then I would say the next step would be really similar for you, is to fill in some of those specifics. What is my actual specific focus around that? So absolutely, thank you for sharing. So let's jump back to our slides again. And you can see that we've begun the first step of the backwards planning process. You figured out what your training will be about and what you want your audience to know and to be able to do by the end of the training. So the next logical step, once you have your objective, is actually to start doing what you need to do to create your agenda. Because your agenda is basically the outline for the rest of your training. And if we're doing backwards planning, everything starts with your objective and then flows backwards from there. And so you can start to build your agenda from the bottom up. At the end of my training, the last thing on my agenda, if I did a good job, what should my audience be doing and what should they know? So you start at the end and then you work backwards from there and say, okay, if this is my goal, this is what I want my audience to be able to do at my end of the training. What do I need to do right before that to help get them there? And then you keep working backwards from there. What do I need to do before this piece right before the end of my training to get folks there? And you start building backwards your agenda from the bottom up. Agendas are really helpful because they organize the rest of your own planning process. I think in my trainings, the person who uses my agendas the very most out of anyone is me myself. I have one printed next to me right now. I look at it constantly when I'm preparing my slides for any training that I offer. And so an agenda really helps keep you organized around your objective. The agenda also helps you to determine your scheduling. As you build your agenda from the bottom up, you'll start to see, oh shoot, this is going to take longer than I thought. My training needs to be an extra hour longer, actually. And you can start to troubleshoot and problem solve before you're too far along the road in planning your training to make any changes. So another reason that I like agendas is they just keep me on track and on time. I am very aware right now that I'm running a little bit behind my agenda, and that's okay. But if I didn't know that, then I'd be in trouble because I wouldn't have the ability to shift things during the break that we have coming up in about 5 or 10 minutes to make sure that we cover the most important things. So agendas are super, super important, and they are the next step in the planning process after you have determined your objective. As you are creating your agenda, you definitely want to remember to include several spots for audience participation. And what that looks like is very different depending on what type of training you're running, who is involved in your training, how much time you have, how much information you have to share. So for those of you who were in the condensed makeup orientation last week, there was not as much engagement time. I had way too much information to cover. I just had to keep going. But if you've been in some of my other trainings, especially for folks who were in some of the cultural humility trainings last year, almost the entire thing is engagement. The main point is just to make sure that you have some engagement built in, spaced out throughout your agenda. You don't want to make folks sit and listen for 45, 50 minutes, an hour without at least having some opportunity to engage. And as I've shared, there are lots of ways to engage. Jamboard, asking people to speak up and share. In person, you can play games. You can post big posters on the wall and ask people to get up and move around and write on them. So your engagement strategies are really up to you, but you do want to have them. So before we move into our break in a few minutes, I just want to share the next piece of our practice from the participant guide, which is to continue working so that we can get ourselves to a place where we can make our agenda. So if I go back to the participant guide, I'm now going to go on to page 3 for English and page 6 for Spanish. And there are a couple of guiding questions to answer first before you actually create your agenda. These guiding questions should be based on the work you've already done, creating your objective and doing your brainstorm. And the questions I want you to spend a few minutes answering before we go on break right now are, what skills or knowledge do folks need to have by the end of the training? How can I ask guests to practice and demonstrate those skills and knowledge during the training? And what activities will allow me to assess whether or not my audience has learned what I wanted them to learn? In other words, if I did a good job in my training, how do I know that? How are my guests showing me that? Are they sharing and speaking up and talking about things with new knowledge? Are they engaging in one of the activities that I have just trained about? Absolutely. Here is the link in the chat for that again. So that's the first question. You take a few minutes to work on that. And as soon as you're done with that, you don't need to wait for me. Just go ahead and move into the second question. Once you know how your audience is going to show you that they have learned what you want them to learn, what do you need to do before that to get them there? Go ahead, Silda.
Yo pienso que es importante
I think the pretest is important to know how much they know, and then maybe a post-test to know if they've learned what you were trying to teach them.
It's an excellent idea and one that is often used in the world of education. Every single school does this. It is why we have that standardized testing at the beginning of every year. It is also a best practice that the Office for Community Health Workers uses. If you've done the core competency curriculum, you know that there's a pretest and a post-test, right? So an excellent strategy for evaluating the learning and growth after a training. What I'm asking you to do right now is difficult. If it feels hard, that's okay. You're just trying to figure out, how does your audience show you that they've learned what you want them to learn? And then working backwards from there, what do you need to teach them before that so that they're able to do it?
I think if we participate more and can answer the questions that you ask about what we have learned, that show you how much we learn.
You're absolutely right. And it is one of my favorite strategies, is just to listen. If I just listen to what folks are saying in my training, by the end of the training, I usually have a pretty good idea if they've learned what I want them to learn. Absolutely.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, so participation is key. It's another reason to build audience engagement into your trainings, because that's the only way you're going to know if your training was actually successful. It is 11:01, and we do need to take. Yes, go ahead, Fabiola, before.
Yes, sure. And also depends a lot on the topic, because the people will react differently. And some of the, as the people say, you just listening to the people, if they are changing the vocabulary, using the phrases, and just acknowledging that they are more open to talk about the topic is a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. When people have more willingness to speak about a topic, that's a sign that you've done a good job with your training, because people won't speak up if they think they're wrong. They'll just stay quiet. Absolutely, great example. So we are just very slightly after 11 o'clock. I encourage you to just keep reflecting and working if you can on these two questions and these two boxes from page 3 of the participant guide if you're doing English, and page 6 of the participant guide if you are doing Spanish. So just keep those in your brain. We are going to go on a break now for about 10 minutes, but you're going to want to hold on to your objective and the activities that you think you might put in your training, and then the backwards planning from there of how you will get folks to those activities. What do they need to know first? So just kind of hold those pieces in your brain as we go on break right now, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes, let's say 11:14, and we'll pick up again from there. Does that sound good? Awesome. Thanks so much, folks. I will see you in about 10 minutes. All right, everyone. I want to gently encourage you to come on back and rejoin the space. We are going to get started again in just a moment. And before the break, I asked you all just to hold in your heads the objective, the activity that your audience will do to demonstrate that they have learned what you want them to learn. And so the next step from there of holding, developing, and holding those pieces is to actually begin building out more of the agenda. Because again, that will become the outline for the whole rest of your training. And you can use it in your planning process to do things like make your slides or gather your materials or figure out what type of in-person space you might need if you're doing an in-person training. So the agenda is the logical next step once you have an objective and some idea of what you want your folks in your training to know and to do. So we're going to jump back to the participant guide in just a moment. But before that, I just want to have these questions on the screen because these are the real main questions that you should focus on as you continue. Whoops. Okay, is my internet back, folks? I think I cut out for a second. Thumbs up. I'm gonna wait another second because I still see a lot of frozen screens. Okay, it looks better now. I see thumbs up. Sorry about that, folks. I was talking to myself for a moment there for sure. My internet cut out. So I was saying that before we go back to the participant guide to actually practice building your agenda, there are just a few questions to keep in your head throughout that process. And those questions are on the screen right now. The same question we've had a lot over and over. What should guests be able to do by the end of the training? And how can I do this or see this from my guests during my training? And then working backwards from that knowledge or that skill, what do I need to teach people earlier in the training so that they can learn what I want them to learn? What do I need to do to build up to that final activity or that final piece of learning? And as you are participating in this agenda building process, also consider that there are a couple of things that you know will always be there. You'll always have an introduction to your training, probably with some framing, as I shared. You'll always have a closure to your training, perhaps with a feedback form. You should always have breaks in your training unless they're only about an hour long. But in general, if you go over the 1 hour mark, you should be giving folks about 10 minutes per hour to take a break. So these are things you know and can kind of slot in and shift around as you build out the rest of your agenda. And they can help keep you on track to making a really robust, well-planned agenda that guides the rest of your training. I also just want to share that in my planning of this training, I realized from my backwards planning that it wouldn't be helpful just to give you an agenda template and say, okay, here you go, start planning a training. There were some things we had to do first. We had to work backwards from the idea of the objective and backwards planning and the end goal before introducing an agenda even made sense for you all. So that's what I did in my backwards planning process for this training. And it's why our agenda practice wasn't right at the beginning, because I knew that wouldn't make sense. We didn't have what we needed, the skills and knowledge we needed to write an agenda without first going over objectives and backwards planning. So you can kind of see how I was working backwards. So with that info, let's go ahead and go back to the participant guide. And if you go on to the next page, it will look like this. It has a blank agenda template. This is on page 4 in English, and I believe it's page 7 in Spanish. And it has spots for you to start planning things like the title, the date of your training. But I'd really encourage you to kind of start in the bottom section. What do you want folks to know and do at the end of your training? And then how in these previous sections of your training, how do you build up to that? So I'm going to offer just about 2 or 3 minutes, not nearly enough time for you to start playing with your agenda planning right now, using your same objective and brainstorm that you already did on this participant guide. See if you can start to fill some things in, working from the bottom of your agenda and moving backwards from there. And just see what that looks like and how that process feels for you. We don't have enough time to complete a whole agenda for a whole training right now, but you can also always come back and revisit and continue this work outside of this training space. And this participant guide might be helpful for you in planning future trainings. And I will share it after this training in my post-training memo so that you have it and can just print it and use it whenever you would like. Go ahead, Kimberly.
You said on the bottom, you said you would to do what do you want folks to know at the end of the training, and what did you follow up with at whenever you said to do for the rest of that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
No problem. Yeah. At the end, what do you want folks to know to be able to do? What do you want them to take away from the training? And then moving backwards from there, what do you need to teach them right before that so that they can do that?
Thank you.
For sure. So for example, if I have a goal of teaching an 8th grade student how to write a book report using quotes from their book, my planning process would start with, okay, they need to write a book report that uses quotes from the book. Right before that, and in order to be able to do that, they need to know how to find important quotes in their book. They need to know how to put those quotes into their own writing with quotation marks and citations. And so I would need to work backwards and teach them other pieces. I would need to teach them how to do citations. I would need to teach them about what makes good evidence before I ask them to write a book report. Because if I just ask them to write a book report, they're going to be like, how do I do that? They need other skills in order to do that. And so that's how the backwards planning comes in. I have an end goal, a book report. What do I need to teach first so that my students can do that? Does that help giving that example? Okay. So again, we don't have much time. I do want to keep moving so we get through all our material, but you can, if you want to just kind of keep working on your agenda right now as I'm talking, that's totally fine with me. If you want to put it aside and revisit it after the training, that's also cool. But do practice. Try building a whole agenda and see what it looks like and see what it does to your anxiety about any upcoming training you might offer. Once you have your agenda outlined and fully complete, you may need to make some changes as you prepare the rest of the training. That sort of naturally just happens, and that's okay. But you should at least have a really firm foundation of knowing what you're going to cover, how long it's going to take, and whether or not it will allow you to accomplish your objective. So once your agenda is complete, then you're ready to start working on some other pieces that actually build out the real content of the training. In my process, that usually means once I have an agenda, I start working on my slides because I know that most of my presentations are online. I know that many people are visual learners. I know that having something to look at keeps people's focus and attention. And so I go to slides. You may decide for your training that you don't need slides, that you actually just need to dialogue, to see people's faces and talk. That's fine. If you do need slides, you want to have an agenda first, because your agenda creates the outline for your slides. You know what slides you need to make because you already planned it in your agenda. When you're making slides, just a few things to note. They're really effective, but they can also be very boring and unhelpful. There are a few things to pay attention to. You want your slides to look nice. People like looking at nice looking stuff that is easy to see, easy to read, and easy to follow. You want your slides to be useful. It's a good sign if you have people in your training saying, can you send me these slides afterwards? Please send these slides. That's a really good sign. You want to have a balance of text and images. And on this slide, I put that the meta is that this probably was not a good choice of image. It's so busy, it has so much going on that it actually is distracting. It takes away from the text. It makes me start thinking about how I'd like to be that guy there playing with this cool looking screen. So just an example of like a little bit of maybe what not to do, that simple images are typically better. And slides are also better if they are not read directly. So you can see how I'm doing it now. I talk about the slides. There's little snippets that I will read, but I don't do it in a tone of voice where it sounds like I'm reading. And I don't just read slide after slide. That's how you lose people. People get bored and they check out. It's the difference between going like this. Almost always have something for your audience to look at, unless you want to engage participants in direct conversation with each other, which is a very valuable strategy to use often. Not engaging. A more engaging version of that is you almost always want to have folks looking at something. It keeps their attention, it keeps them focused. And in case they lost their focus for a minute, they can look at the slide and know what you're talking about and get back on the same page. So you see, I took the info in that paragraph at the bottom of the slide and I just said it a different way, in my natural, normal speaking tone of voice, not reading, just how I would talk to a friend or a family member. And folks respond better to that. Invitations. Invitations are a really important part of any training or planning process. And they are a part of your pre-planning because you need to send them a little while before your training. A lot of my training invitations to you all are sent before I'm done preparing my training. If I know what I need to do, and the training is about 2 weeks from now, I'm going to send an invitation even though my training isn't quite totally done, so that my audience has time to put it on their calendar without any conflicts, and isn't like, oh, well, that's tomorrow. I can't do that. I'm busy tomorrow. Invitations should be warm, welcoming. Something I need to get better at is providing an objective and agenda in invitations. It's a really good practice. I do have agendas created, but I often forget to put them in my invitations. Invitations shouldn't be too long, but they should include context and background information. And invitations are most effective when they're sent once. I know I dealt with some very serious issues with that because of a Zoom link changing on me over and over back in February. And that was confusing for folks and it didn't feel good for me either. And so Sometimes it will happen where you have issues, but if you can just send one invitation, that's the best thing to do. If you're doing Zoom trainings, I encourage you to spend a lot of time in Zoom settings and playing around with adding Zoom invitations to, or Zoom call links to invitations, because it can get really tricky and weird. I'm not going to go through guidance of Zoom stuff today, but if you need support around that, please let me or your consultants know, because it can create issues when you're setting up invitations. The main point is that invitations take time and they need to come out well before your training. So it's a piece to have in your mind as you're approaching your training date, even if you're not quite finished with things like your slides. A quick note on transparency and representation. When you're preparing trainings, language really matters a lot, especially in our world where there's a lot of stigmatizing language that people have internalized. It's really important to be mindful of the words that you're putting out there to folks. And so just wanted to name about being strategic with representation and terminology used there. It's a lot more supportive and equitable to refer to people who are experiencing homelessness as people who are unhoused, or as people who are experiencing homelessness, as opposed to the homeless. And it's just something to hold in mind as you're preparing presentations on these topics, is think about your language and whether it's equitable or not. There will be mistakes in this regard. Language is complicated. It's impossible to always get it right. I mess up all the time. And that's where it takes just a little vulnerability and trust to ask folks to say, hey, if I say something messed up or that rubs you the wrong way, please let me know. I don't want to be doing that, but sometimes I make a mistake. And that's okay. It's okay to acknowledge mistakes in the training space. When I have a typo, I say, oops, in front of everyone. Oops, look at that, I have a typo. Let me fix that real quick. So just a quick another look at the flow chart. With all of these different pieces of backwards planning, objectives, building out agendas, creating slides, sending invitations, all of that is represented in your pre-planning and planning phases. And so now you can start to see why this planning flow chart is so heavy on the left side and so much lighter on the right side. The planning and pre-planning are almost all of it. Delivery is really just the matter of spending time in the space. So for today's training, I actually wasn't working on this at all this morning. It was ready to go. And so that I knew all I had to do is join the call, spend 2 hours with you lovely folks, and then I would be good. So you can see we were a bit behind. This was our 10-minute break that we already took, but I think that's okay. It's one of the things that happens in trainings, especially when people are sharing thoughts and ideas. I always try to make space for that. And then I cut other things if I need to, because I can always follow up later through post-training memo or email, or even scheduling a second follow-up training session. So we are getting ready to switch gears now away from planning and into facilitation. And so at this point, I'm just wondering if there are any questions, concerns, or comments about planning, pre-planning, backwards planning, agenda planning, or anything else we've covered so far. Are there any questions or comments?
I have a question, Ashan, regarding the agenda. You
Mhm.
present the final agenda, right? But you have like your own agenda, like it's more like more break. Okay.
It's a great question. My answer personally depends on the training. For a shorter training like this, my agenda is exactly the same as yours. For me personally, I did not need more than that. I've also been doing this for 11 or 12 years now. And so it's really up to you. If you think it's helpful to create an internal agenda and have it be much, much, much more detailed, I strongly encourage you to do that. But I would keep that to be internal and make your external agenda briefer. Because if your agenda is like 6 pages long, no one's gonna look at it, right? So yes, you can, and in many cases, it's very helpful to have an internal agenda that's more detailed that you can even share with your team, and then an external agenda that's really just kind of like a 1-page usually.
Yeah, I ask you this because with the community health workers that are in our diabetes prevention program, we have like 3 days of 3 classes, and then we have different topics. So I create something like I highlight the big topics, and then I introduce the other options that they can, so they can have a guide, and they will not be thinking about I'm missing something, so they know they cover everything.
Absolutely. It's a great practice. And for my longer trainings, I do have an internal agenda with more detail. And even sometimes things like, if we run out of time for this, cancel this other thing later on my agenda. So you can see where the planning comes in to really help prevent time problems too. You can have contingency plans. If this goes wrong, I will do this, right? And so that's another one of the ways that planning is important and can reduce your anxiety and make sure you have a smooth training.
Especially because it was the first time they were giving a class. So I want them to have everything at hand, because I wouldn't be there. So they need to succeed.
Absolutely. And earlier in my career, in my early teaching days, I would have an outline for my classes and almost a script for my lessons. And as you get more practice, you can stop doing some of that because you just don't need it anymore.
This week our team is not going out because the weather. So we needed to spend this time in a way. So I came out with this training, talking, whatever, in 2-3 days, and I didn't have all this before. I say, why didn't I have that before? But it came out really good because I did 4 or 5 topics, and then I expand, and so everybody said that they like it, so that's good. So it came out good.
Great, I love that, and I also love that you're finding ways to adjust your work in this heat wave because, keep everyone safe and healthy and cool. So, all right, thank you for that. Going back to our slides now, we are transitioning away from planning and into facilitation. And since we're changing topics, I put a slide that doesn't have much info on that. It's what we call a signpost, because it's allowing your audience to know what's about to happen. So they're not like, wait, aren't we still talking about agendas? No, we're switching gears now. And a slide like this makes it really easy to see that. The main thing to know about facilitation is that it's not easy, but it should be approachable if you planned thoroughly. One of the biggest issues that folks run into when facilitating a training or meeting is the fear of public speaking. I'm just curious, use your Zoom control to give a heart or a clap or a thumbs up or any of those if you get nervous when you have to speak in front of other people. Just raising your hand or giving a thumbs up or even typing in the chat. Does it make you nervous to speak in front of folks? Terrified of public speaking. See a lot of people nodding. I saw some people on my screen go like, like kind of suck their teeth and go like, ooh, they actually had a physical anxiety reaction. And then sometimes, right? Sometimes it just depends on who it is. I get less nervous in front of a big group of people than I do in front of a small group of people. And it's just to
I-
show that different people have different experiences. Go ahead.
It didn't bother me at all. I can speak in front of a big crowd and it doesn't bother me.
Excellent. That's a great skill to have. And it's also very rare. It's very rare. And the reason that it's rare for people to feel comfortable speaking in public is because of science. Public speaking and the fear of public speaking is grounded in what's called a socially based phobia or a socially based fear. And these are the most common types of fear in the world. Social fear is more powerful than a fear of heights, than a fear of flying. There are more people afraid of public speaking than are afraid of snakes. And the reason for that is because we humans are social animals. We depend on other humans and are belonging with other humans in order to literally survive. And so when we're put in a position where the spotlight is on us, we're taking on a major risk in terms of our social belonging, because people might not like what we have to say. And so when we take that risk, what we are actually risking is our own lives, as far as the brain is concerned, right? Hopefully your training space is safe and you're not literally risking your life to be there. But as far as your brain, especially the lower brainstem part, the animal or lizard brain is concerned, speaking in public is risking your own life. And that is why it's so scary and why it is the most common fear that exists among anyone. Is there anyone else who has any thoughts about that? About why or how public speaking feels really scary, or some experiences around that?
Sean, it could be also how older you start. Okay, because like myself, I remember in Mexico and my elementary school, I was talking publicly when I was second, third grade, and they teachers had to do it. And then in my older life, I had a wonderful teacher, master, the priest, that he showed me how to give a whole hour, not just a whole hour in any topic regarding the Gospels with any object that I could find in my just near to me, and it was amazing. So that's why you can see that I'm not a shade, but I can talk and talk and talk, and so.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Age, experience definitely come into play. The fear of public speaking reduces the more and more you do it. So it's really scary at first, but that fear does lessen as you get more practice. And it's just a natural part of the process. When go ahead.
I think if you know what the topic, you are not afraid. You know, if they're gonna ask you a question, you'll be able to prompt answer the question, and that means knowledge. And when you have the knowledge, you don't care in front of how many people you talk.
Yeah, it definitely can help. If you have the knowledge, for some folks, that's enough for them to be like, okay, I'm not afraid. I know what I'm talking about. And for other folks, it still feels really scary, even if they know it. And I think your comment I appreciate also because it shows the importance of the planning process. How is it that you learn what you need to know to feel confident and comfortable in the training space? You do research beforehand. You do that as a part of your planning before the training. So yeah, everyone's experience is different. Some folks don't have fear at all. It doesn't make me nervous to speak in front of others because I've done it for 12 years. When I first started, I was probably less nervous than some of my other teacher colleagues because I had practice in speech and debate in high school, but I was still nervous, right? And so it's just a matter of your own awareness and how it affects you. Serenity, go ahead. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I was gonna say just that for me, it's kind of like like the context matters. Like in some instances, like especially if like it's an instructional thing, if it's your peers, you know, like making sure that what I have to communicate is of value to folks, that it's accessible, that it's that it follows, like is well connected. Like I think that's the thing that for me that's most that where the anxiety lies, and is very much connected to what you're saying again about planning.
Yeah. Yeah, anxiety goes up if you're not sure how your audience will receive what you are sharing. And that's a part of the planning process too, right? Is cultivating buy-in, making sure that folks believe and agree with the reason for being there. And part of that can happen during the training itself, right? In this training, I gave a slide that's like, all it said was, here's why planning is important. I'm trying to cultivate buy-in to get people to see my side. So there's also a piece of persuasion that can happen in a training to be like, no, this is important. Here is why, so that you don't face anxiety from people being like, why are we even here? Thank you, Serenity. There's some strategies you can use despite how strong public speaking fear is. There are ways to reduce that anxiety. One of them is just time and practice. And there's no secret to that. It's just the hard work of time and practice, just like musicians. There are no shortcuts to learning to play an instrument really well. You just have to take the time and practice. But there are a couple of hacks that I want to share with you. The first one is arriving early. Even when I'm on Zoom, I open the Zoom call 15 minutes before my meeting time. Because if I do that, then I know like, okay, my slides are open, my agenda is next to me, the call is welcoming people, I'm ready to go. And it gives me time to think of things like, oh shoot, I forgot to create a feedback form for today. And then I can do that real quick. Another hack is to do a power pose. This is kind of silly, but it absolutely works and is grounded in science. Power poses are similar to what you see on the right side of the screen here. If you've seen people participating in athletic events, when they win, they typically will throw their arms in the air like that, right? A sign of victory. And an interesting study showed that even blind people will do this. If they achieve success in a competition, they will throw their arms in the air, even though they have not seen other people do that in their lives and may not know that that is a human behavior for celebration. And so folks did research on this and found that that's actually a built-in reflex response, and it's connected to the release of feel-good chemicals in our body called endorphins. And doing power poses actually reduces your anxiety. So you can do a victory pose for 5 minutes before your training. I sometimes go into the bathroom to do this so people don't look at me weird, right? Find a little private space for it. There are other power poses. Another one is just to put your hands real firm on your waist, like Superman stance. This one, you know, any sort of thing where you're showing your strength, your power physically to yourself reduces anxiety. Breathing exercises, box breathing, Ujjayi breathing. There are lots of different breathing exercises that help. Visioning, literally fantasizing and visioning your way through your training. This is something that Olympic athletes do all the time, especially folks like ski jumpers or other athletes who are doing these really complicated spins and tricks. They'll visualize it before they do it. And a dry run, this came up already. A dress rehearsal, a dry run, practice in front of the mirror, practice with friends, family members. And there are lots of other things that work. So just very briefly, maybe just 1 minute, does anyone else have any strategies that they'd like to share for reducing pre-meeting anxiety?
What they taught us all the time is we used to have that cassette recorder, and they told us to talk, to give it, to say it, and then we just listening, and doing other activities while listening to that, and you can absorb a lot, and that becomes more natural instead of reading.
It's a great example and idea, recording yourself and then watching it back, and especially watching it back with other people who you trust, right? Where it feels safe to receive feedback. This is a part of teaching practice. When I was becoming a teacher, I had to record myself multiple times and submit those video recordings to the state in order to get certified. And it's a practice that athletes engage in as well, recording themselves, looking at their form, adjusting how they compete based on that. So you've gone through your planning. You've gone through your pre-meeting anxiety. You've shown up early. Your guests are starting to arrive. The moment has come. It's time to start your training. This is a really scary moment, and there's not much that can prepare you for it aside from some of the strategies that I've already prepared or shared. When I was a teacher, I had 2 years of training and a master's degree from UCLA. And when the classroom door closed on my first day of teaching, none of that mattered at all. I was alone in a room full of children and I went, oh my goodness, this is real, right? And so I just want to prepare you that that moment can be scary. And sometimes for some folks, it's a matter of just fake it till you make it, just pushing through that tough moment, getting that practice, and it feels a little easier next time. The main thing I would say is just don't get trapped in that moment. At a certain point, if you feel the impulse that says, we just need to start, then it's time to start, right? Don't let yourself sit in that anxiety, just get going if you need to. So I like to get started with just saying a welcome, hi folks, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to begin in just a minute or two. So if you could please take your seats or come back to your computers, or I like to just give those gentle encouragements, those signs that we're going to begin. One of the most important things you can do is just find and honor your own style. One of the things that allows me to get started without a ton of anxiety is I just talk. My style is just to talk. I don't have a script. I don't read things. I don't practice too much beforehand because that actually doesn't really work well for me personally. I just talk. I found that to be my style. It feels comfortable. Folks respond pretty well to it. Your style might be totally different. Your style might be much more formal. Your style might be much more playful. That's okay. Whatever feels comfortable will make you be more comfortable. Just a quick tip, especially if you've got a voice that's prone to going out after a lot of talking, always have water. Always have a water close by. You just never know. First impressions matter a lot when you're starting in that training space. Smiling is a big one. being a welcoming presence. I like to dress a little nicer if I'm doing an in-person training, because sometimes that shows your audience that you are the trainer, and it's just helpful for them to have that visual recognition. It's really up to you. The main and best advice is to be organic and natural with your own style. And when I say feel yourself in your own body and voice, I mean that really, just like, where am I at? Where am I in my body? Where is my voice at? Am I tense? Am I loose? Being professional is very helpful in the training space. Everyone is looking at you. And so if you can show that professionalism, you tend to keep more audience attention. And finally, it is totally okay to say, I don't know in a training space, but speaking with a certain authoritative confidence that simply says, I know what I'm talking about. That's also helpful for getting folks to stay engaged and active in your training. If you end up doing things where you're like, oh, actually, maybe I got that wrong, or oh, so sorry, this is like outdated info, and I guess I'll just have to take another look and go back, or that sort of uncertainty is how you lose people real quick. Because people will be like, they don't know what they're talking about, why am I listening? And that can happen very quickly. So it's just something to be aware of. You want to speak with a confidence if and when you can, an assertiveness, not aggressiveness, just with a tone that says, hey, I know my stuff. I know what I'm talking about. And this note, throughout all of this, just be really patient with yourself. Don't judge yourself. It really does take time and practice to build this type of confidence and be natural at presenting information to folks. So honor wherever you're at in that process. We're expecting and looking for progress, not perfection. Just a piece of potential troubleshooting that comes up sometimes. Sometimes certain folks get really excited about sharing, and they tend to dominate and take over the conversation. I value letting voices share in my training spaces, and unless I feel like someone is really taking a ton of time, I typically will not interrupt. That said, if you have someone who's going on and on, maybe they're talking about something that's outside of the scope of the training, you typically do want to step in and intervene. Otherwise, you can watch a half hour go by and then look at your agenda and start to panic at the time you've lost. So if someone's really dominating a conversation, having group agreements at the beginning of the training is a really good idea, because if someone starts to take over, you can refer back to those group agreements and just say, hey, I really appreciate and value your contributions. One of our agreements today was to make space for other voices. So I'm wondering if we could hear from someone else at this time, right? You're not telling the person that they're doing anything wrong. You're just referring to your agreements and making more space for others. There are other strategies that can be a part of your planning process. I love a parking lot because it allows me to address questions later and not lose training time to questions. You can also just validate and move on, say, I love that contribution, so much good stuff there. I think we should talk about it further. For right now, we do have to keep going because we only have 2 minutes left. And that is true for us right now. We only have 2 minutes left. So I'm gonna have to speed up here and go through the last couple of things, but Silda, go ahead.
Sí, yo nomás quería decir que es importante, ¿verdad?
I just wanted to say it's important when you're making a presentation to make space and ask people if they have questions.
Absolutely, it's super important. It's something that I try to do. I try to have a parking lot and then make space for questions. That's why I said, are there any questions before we move into facilitation during today's training? It's super important. It's also sometimes very difficult because question and answer takes a lot of time. So you have to balance it, right? Coming up on our last few minutes, conflict management. Sometimes in training spaces, people disagree and there can be conflict. This is another reason that I think it's really important to establish group agreements in certain trainings. For a training like this, I didn't think we needed them because we're not really touching on pieces of culture or identity or things that could be taken real seriously. I'm talking to you about a PowerPoint slideshow. Not very triggering. Other training spaces might be triggering. There may be conflict. And one of the best ways to handle conflict is to prevent it in the first place by having group agreements, by encouraging the use of I statements, saying things like, well, I think this, but it's okay if you think that, right? Sometimes conflict is helpful and generates new ideas, and that's okay. And you can make space for that. But if people are starting to name call or those types of things, that's where it's really a good idea to interrupt it. You can refer to the agreements. You can pause the agenda and just step in and say, hey, folks, I think that we've actually kind of gotten into some tricky territory with some high emotions here. Let's take a step back and just breathe for a minute. I've had to do that many times before. Stop a training and say, hey, folks, let's just breathe. Let's just breathe for a minute, right? Sometimes that doesn't work and you do need a mediator to come in and solve your conflict afterwards, and that's okay. So folks, as we come up on the end, we are already very slightly over, and I want to try to get you out of here in the next 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you for staying on for an extra 5 with me. I do appreciate it. We don't have time to do this practice during today's training, but this is something that I encourage you to think about, reflect on, and maybe practice on your own with your team or other folks you trust. Just pretend that you're in a meeting where you have group agreements to make space for other voices. And during a section of your agenda where people are sharing and participating, someone starts sharing their thoughts and they go on and on and on, and they're repeating themselves and they keep talking and talking. And later in the same training, they do the same thing and they're talking and talking. And at this point, you've lost maybe 10, 15 minutes of training time to one voice. What do you do? We don't have time to practice or share on that right now, but just consider that. Keep that in your mind because those are the type of things that you will run into in training spaces. And so a part of your pre-planning is just anticipating that. Thinking about what would I do in that case so that you're not on the spot if it happens. And as we come to the end in our last couple of minutes, just a few tips and tools. Again, with some more signposting. So, you know, I'm switching gears again, going from facilitation to tips and tools. The best advice I can give is to be genuine. People can see through performance pretty quickly unless you're a really good actor. So just be genuine with yourself, your voice, your body, your beliefs, your culture. Be genuine, honor yourself. Be courageous. Sometimes that means faking it till you make it. Sometimes that means some radical acceptance, the idea of whatever happens, I'll be okay. It might not go well, and that's also okay. Being vulnerable, it's totally fine to say, I don't know, or oops, I made a mistake during a training. In fact, it builds trust because it shows your guests that you're a human just like them. And finally, our new technological advancements with AI language models such as ChatGPT, and Google Bard are very helpful in training work. You can say to those language models things like, create an agenda for a training about this. And it won't give you something perfect, but it will give you an outline so you're not starting with nothing. So I encourage you to play with those tools and see what they can do. There are lots of other strategies that I'll share in the post-training memo. I'm going to skip this slide just because of time, but one of the things people do run into is saying or a lot. There are strategies to address that. So if you struggle with that, please reach out and I can share those with you separately. We don't have time right now. We're already 4 minutes over and I want to get you out of here in the next 60 seconds. So in the interest of that, and sorry that the ending here was a little bit rushed, I would love to gather, let me stop sharing. I did prepare a feedback form. Oh, I see. It is on the Jamboard. So let me pull that up again. Okay, so on the Jamboard, on the 4th slide, just a really simple feedback form for today. Just pluses and wishes, thumbs up and thumbs down. What did you like? What didn't you like? So if you could take a moment to add to that, I would really appreciate it. Again, I know the ending here is a little rushed. We're getting out 5 minutes late as well. So I do apologize for that and thank you for your time. You don't need to stay on the call to give your feedback on today's training. Feel free to just hop off the call and add that afterwards. The main note I want to end on with you all today is that everything I went over, I make it sound and look easy. And that is because I've been doing it for 12 years, every day for 12 years. It is not easy. It is very, very difficult. And as you encounter that in your own practice, don't judge yourself for it. It is natural to feel like this is hard. I'm dealing with 1,000 different things at once. How do I do this? And it's okay to make mistakes in your process. So with that, I'm letting you out 6 minutes late. I do appreciate everyone. Thank you so much and sorry for keeping you again. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and an excellent weekend up ahead. I will stay on the call in case there are any questions or concerns or comments, but at this point you are free to leave. I did mention in the invitation that I didn't have time to set up CEUs for this training, so my apologies for that, but there will be CEU opportunities coming up with our motivational interviewing training next week. So I look forward to seeing those of you who will be there at that time. Thanks so much, folks. That is 2 years of graduate school in 2 hours. I hope that it went well for you.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah,
did you listen to Pantera?
not much. Familiar, but not a fan.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
know
don't
you put it.
dislike, I just haven't really gotten too into it.
Yeah, what kind of music do you like?
Lately I've been listening to a lot of 90s music again. I've been listening to like my 90s Red Hot Chili Peppers and all that kind of stuff. And also some of the hip hop from that time, like Talib Kweli and Mos Def and some of those other artists I love. Aside from that, a lot of classic rock and then similar, like I listen to a lot. I listen to soul music a lot. I like to listen to funk and soul. So
Yeah.
Lots of different stuff.
Did you embrace punk rock at all?
Not the way that some of my classmates did. That was very much like 6th and 7th grade for me. So I remember my buddies in middle school had Spikes and all this stuff. And I didn't get too much into it, but I did like the music.
Yeah. Did you like the Seattle music too, the 90s Seattle music, or were you more like a a Blur person like Britpop.
Both. Nirvana and Blur liked both.
Yeah, they were both important. You know, Blur
Yeah.
kind of took it back to, let's not be so serious and talk about, things that are unproductive,
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks so much, Cisco. See ya.
All right.
Any questions from anyone else? I wasn't expecting to talk about my music taste just now. Happy to do so, but anything else? Awesome. Well, I am going to end the call now. Thanks so much, folks. I hope this was helpful for you.
Thank you.
And I will
Thank you.
see you soon.
It was great.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Great. Well, I hope you all have a great day. See you next time.